remember like actors like Gideon Glick came in. He was like, "What's it like?" So it was his first day. I said, like, you just never know. You just sort of start talking and, you know, he'll film it. Like, there's no like action, you know, it was just like you would walk onto set and suddenly he'd be like Lenny chatting to you and you would realize that he was maybe saying words from the script and then you'd start talking back and then you're like, oh, there's someone filming. And, you know, but it was very like he tried to take away all the artifice of the filmmaking thing, which if you like theatre, which I do, it's like, great. You feel like you're on a stage.
I am so excited to be here today. Please join me in welcoming Carey Mulligan. And we are going to talk about her amazing performance in this film. Oh my gosh, Carey, congratulations on the film, that performance. How many of you were crying out there, like just getting all tearful? Look at that. See, they were grateful for that dark moment where they could just wipe their tears. I'm curious because Bradley approached you about this in 2018. What did he pitch you and what made you say yes to it?
Hi, everyone. He did. It was 2018. I was doing a one-woman show off Broadway called Girls and Boys. And he came to the first preview of that, which is not when you want someone to come and see you in something. Particularly not Bradley Cooper. But yeah, and we'd known each other, you know, mainly through theatre over the years. And so he came to that and then we sat down a couple of days later and he said he was making a film about Leonard Bernstein and his wife about marriage. And he showed me Make Our Garden Grow, sort of Lenny conducting that. And that was it, really. It wasn't sort of, he knew it wasn't going to be the story about the wife to a great man or, you know, it was about the two of them and their relationship. And it would span 30 years. And the heart of it would be his music.
I'm fascinated because, as you can tell, we're Brits here. Leonard Bernstein, who was he to you before Bradley even approached you?
Maybe a composer. Not, you know, no, yeah. I mean, not, you know, what he is here, I suppose, which is much more of a cultural icon in the UK. Right. You know, I'd say he's in the music world. Like, that's probably the extent of it.
It's such a beautiful film. It is such a beautiful complex look in a way at this relationship. When you got that script, like, talk about, you know, your reaction to seeing the whole script and your process of diving into somebody that is a real life person.
Well, yeah, I mean, what was interesting is that, you know, I didn't really, there was a script that Josh Singer had written. And then the understanding was that Josh and Bradley were going to write a script together. And so I had, you know, basically I was getting scenes from Bradley as they were writing. So he was texting me. And actually one of the first things that he sent me was he texted me the Thanksgiving Day fight in 2018. I just got it as a text message. He was like, hey, I just wrote this, read this. And I was literally, my kids were in the bath and I was like, I'm totally paying attention. And so it was kind of piecemeal like that. It was over the couple of, you know, it was that sort of thing. So I'd get bits that they'd worked on. So I didn't really see a full thing, I suppose, until maybe 2020. So I got to see it kind of form and come together. And I just kept on thinking, I can't believe there's two blokes writing this. Like, you know, for the stuff that they were writing for Felicia, because it was just such brilliant writing.
Speaking about the Thanksgiving scene, and that was the scene that I did watch this morning. I was just saying, like, I revisited Maestro and randomly picked a scene, and the Thanksgiving scene, Matthew Libatique's cinematography is incredible, right? Yes. That scene is so powerful. Talk about filming that and the conversations that you had with Bradley about what is happening in that relationship at that point.
Yeah, so I think because it was a bit of writing we'd had for so long, it was also one that we had read to each other a bunch of times we'd worked on our dialect on that. So that was something we would use with Tim Monick to practice, because it was so much, it was such a monologue for her that it was like a good sort of warm-up practice to be able to do that. And it was also the last thing we shot in New York. We shot most of the film in New York, and then we shot like a week and a half in the UK later in the year. But that was all the New York's. That was the last day of the New York segment. So we'd lived basically their whole lives up until then. And he wanted it to be one shot, one take, never wanted to cut, never wanted coverage. And so it felt like theatre. It was like, I was delighted. I didn't want to do it. There's that thing where you shoot the master and then you're like, oh, fuck, now I have to try and make it look, the same or better, or I'm going to try and do it but then it's bad. And so we basically, he set us up in that shot. They kind of locked off the camera, and we did 3 takes, and in the first 2 takes I was sitting in a chair. And it just didn't, like, something kind of it just wasn't working. I mean, it was fine. It was just a very different, there was no kind of crescendo to the fight. It just sort of was like a different kind of argument. And then on the 3rd take, I was in the window, and for some reason that, like, he came in, he still had his glasses on. That was really annoying. And he was carrying this carton of milk, and he bumped into the furniture, and he was kind of more hungover and a bit more kind of obnoxious. And it went, but what was amazing for me about that with Bradley was that, he would direct through his performance. So he didn't note me on those first 2 takes. He just altered what he was doing, which then altered what I was doing. So he became more annoying. I became more incensed. And so then that was the only take where I got up and walked towards him to yell at him, and for that final bit. So we were suddenly in that position where I was standing right in front of him. And then at the end of the scene, there was no more dialogue. And there's this sort of, I say, if you're not careful, you're going to die, lonely old queen. And then there was just silence. And then he, in his head, was thinking, right, at this point, the children are going to be knocking on the door, shouting. So he gave enough time for the children to knock, then for Snoopy to pass by in the window. And then he said, in a minute, to the kids. And then I said, I'll go. But there were, obviously there were no children, there was no Snoopy. So he was timing all of this stuff in his head whilst in the scene. I mean, it was just, and afterwards I was like, well, I don't know why we had that big pause at the end. I just couldn't figure out really what was going on. But of course, he was allowing for this like CGI thing that was going to be built like months late. I mean, insane.
Wow, we're getting inside his brain and like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tim, your dialect coach. I mean, my gosh, what an incredible, your accent in that is great. Talk about working with your dialect coach and like just how you perfected Felicia's accent. Because if you watch those videos, like, I mean, yeah.
It was the thing I was the most afraid of. And the first couple of times that we read the script, I every time I was in LA or New York, I'd go to Bradley's house, and usually we would sit down and just read it from start to finish. And sometimes with Josh Singer. And every time I just did sort of a posh version of I was like, I'll just do RP, that'll be fine. And I was like, I'll get to the voice. And he was like, you got to do it. And I was like, I know, I'll be fine. But I'd worked with Tim basically forever. Tim did The Great Gatsby onwards, everything I've done since then. And all of them have been independent films, and he always just could never come to set, but would do it on Zoom for like, a favor, basically. It was just amazing. And so this was a chance to actually work with Tim in person. And so we did lots on Zoom when we weren't together. And then we started, when we got to New York, we were seeing each other every day for a while before we started shooting. And just an hour just to like keep it. And then I would just listen to her a lot and listen to her voice. And we had these amazing interviews with her that we could listen to. And then Tim has this special kind of phonetics that's not phonetics. It's his version of phonetics. So he writes out the whole script in phonetics, and you practice that. So it was just practice until we had a facility where you didn't have to think about it.
This is also the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that you're in prosthetics ever, right? Yeah. What was that like getting to work with the great Kazuhiro, who...
Well, incredible. To see Kazu's work. Actually, my prosthetics were done by a different team, because obviously Bradley's prosthetics was such a big, everyday job. So Kazu was working with Bradley from like 2 a.m. every day until, insane. He was ready by the time the crew arrived, a crew call. So he'd been doing prosthetics for hours before that. So my team was Sian Grigg, who also did Leonardo DiCaprio on Killers of the Flower Moon and has worked with Leo on everything forever, The Revenant. And she did... she and a prosthetics guy called Duncan Jarman did mine. So it was, the aging and then the cancer makeup was the two of them. And it was amazing. I mean, because I love Sian. I've worked with her on Far From the Madding Crowd and Suffragette and Never Let Me Go. And, so she's a good friend. And then Duncan's just amazing. And it's so fine. It's weird because in the scene in the Palm Court scene with Shirley, I look exactly like my mum, like exactly. And I said to them, so this just sort of like a time machine, basically what you're doing, because they weren't making me look any different. They weren't making me look like Felicia. They were, because we didn't want to aim to look like her because she's not famous enough as a, it was important for Bradley, but not because everyone knew what Lenny looked like. And they were like, yeah, this is basically a time machine. We're just sort of advancing things. I was like, oh, this is so depressing. But then at the end of the day, it would come off and I'd be like, I look $1 million because it was suddenly I felt great. So, swings and roundabouts.
And your mum she's seen the film and she obviously saw the aged Felicia.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks all right. Yeah, I'm happy with that.
I want to go back into your research a little bit because you did actually end up going to Chile and seeing Felicia's family to just dive into, the who she was a little bit. Like, talk about that trip and what you learned about her.
Yeah, it was so cool. I mean, I had spent lots of time largely on Zoom with Jamie, Alexandra, and Nina Bernstein, the children, and because of COVID. And then I said to them, like, I've never been to South America. This feels mad to play someone who spent so much of their childhood in a place that I've never been to. I'd love to kind of go and see where she spent some of her time. And so Jamie introduced me to her nephew. And I went a couple of months before we started shooting. And he took me around their old neighborhood to their family home. I met her brother-in-law who was in Ansodonia with them the summer that The Private World of Leonard Bernstein was written, which is a book that we used a lot of the research from. And I went to her school. They showed me there's a cupboard that they had that they would lock the naughty children in. So I went around, the whole place, and it was amazing. And then on the way out, I got COVID. And so at the airport, they said I couldn't fly. So they sent me back to my hotel room and I was stuck there for another 10 days. But I wasn't allowed to leave my room. So I just sat in my room and the Netflix guys were like, what do you need to survive? Because my kids were back in New York. I was like really gutted. And I said, I just need an easel and some paints and some canvases. And I painted Felicia's paintings for 10 days because she was a painter, and there used to be a version of the script where she painted, and I'm a terrible painter, and I hadn't painted since I was a child. So I had painting lessons to try and learn how to paint so that I would not look completely crap when I was. And so I'd become quite into painting, and I'd seen lots of Felicia's paintings and take photos. So I did 10 days of painting, which actually was a kind of lovely holiday from but anyway, I left them all in Chile.
I was like, wait, did you bring them back?
Well, some of them, I brought a couple back, and Kevin Thompson actually put some of them in the background, but you can hardly see them in the movie. But they are there in deep, deep background because they're crap. But, they're like in the...
Wait, I have a Q&A with Kevin on Saturday. I'm going to ask him like where we can spot them.
You probably. I mean, he would have hidden them. He was being very nice.
She is, I feel like she's the heart of this film. And what, because did you have, did she keep journals? Like, how did you tap into how she felt really about Leonard? Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, letters. There are lots of letters, love letters from her to Lenny. And then this interview that she did with John Gruen where she talks about the burden of being his sort of, being his wife and how she felt about it. And I think and also about her artistry, because it was also interwoven? That's not a word. Interwoven, her artistry, but also her love for him, what she felt. Steven Spielberg, who's a producer on the film, said to Bradley when they first started talking about it, that Lenny was her art. And I thought that was such a kind of perfect way of thinking about what she was adamant that it wasn't a sacrifice. She said in one of these interviews, it's not like I gave up my career for him. He didn't ask me to give up anything. I just did it. And it was like she made this choice that side by side, their artistry, his outweighed hers to such an enormous degree in her mind that it was worth dedicating her life to support his, and that would be her artistic contribution. And within that, it was, she loved him. And I think that love was real. I don't think they would have lasted for 30 years if it wasn't. But all of that stuff, it's all the same. It's not, you can't unpick it really. And I found that interesting. And there's a part in the film where she talks to Shirley, and Shirley says, it's being in my brother's orbit comes with challenges. And she says, that it does, but basically that she does it wholeheartedly, and that if it starts to sort of weigh on her too heavily and she can't keep it up, then she absents herself completely from the whole project. She refuses to be a martyr in the whole thing, which is why when he comes in and presents Mass, she just leaves the room and jumps in the pool, because she just can't give him what he wants in that moment, but she also doesn't want to ruin it for him, but she does. But yeah, so all of that stuff, I just was like reading her letters and think, she's just so interesting. And this idea that she wanted to be, she really came to New York to be an actor, and, but she couldn't kind of let herself do the stuff that maybe would have, I found that I just thought, gosh, that's so familiar, because she went to the actor's studio and she thought it was horrific. She was like, oh, this is so silly, all these women crying and everyone sort of pretending to be fried eggs. Like, this is awful. But I think a part of her was like, I wish I could. And that might have been the thing that kind of propelled her on. But she just couldn't sort of she didn't give herself the chance.
The Ely Cathedral scene is phenomenal. I think my jaw's on the floor, and then Felicia appears at the end. I mean, talk about being in the room when that was being filmed, and just seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, that was every day on this, I thought, like, Bradley Cooper has got, he's so brave, the everything that he did from the first day on set, but that day, he's dressed as Leonard Bernstein, and he's in front of the London Symphony Orchestra, who are like the most serious musicians, basically, in the world. They are, and I just thought it's unbelievable what he's attempting to do here, and the courage that took. I was like, as his friend, I was so kind of blown away by it, because I thought, that's terrifying. It'd be terrifying to direct that, let alone to be dressed up as, kind of an eccentric person anyway, and an icon to at least to that community as well. But yeah, it was amazing. I mean, being in proximity to that kind of music is just so moving. It's like, you can't help, you get like a lump in your throat just being near it. And yeah, and the way he tells it, he kept on messing it up the first day that we shot it, but I didn't know that at all. I thought it was great. I was like, every take, I was like, that was it, right? It was perfect. And he kept on doing it again. I was like, what? All right. It was a free show for me, and I had the best seat in the house. But then when it came to shooting it, he orchestrated this very kind of, intricate one-er, basically. And that was the take. And you could feel it, like, when that was done, that was the take. It also ended on my shoulder, and I felt this enormous sense of responsibility not to twitch. So I was like, if the camera does this whole thing and then ends up over my shoulder and I go like, ugh, or move, then I fucked it. So anyway, it was very like held and tense, but amazing to watch.
I have to give a shout out to Mark Bridges and his costume design, and that dress in that moment is amazing. But talk about like working with, Mark, and like, stepping into some of those costumes, like the Chanel tweed suit, later on that she wears, or like any of those outfits, like, and how that helps you, like, what was the first scene that you shot? And
the first thing we shot everything up in Tanglewood first, so all the black and white, so when they were young. And that was so interesting, because when you shoot on black and white film, colors read completely differently. So my costume was sort of a weird, like, burnt orange, mauve, kind of beige thing. Like, my shoes were weird. None of it looked nice in real life, but they had to account for how it was going to read on black and white. But it was all about, Mark was so brilliant with shapes, not just with the era, but also with my age, so that he was, and the underpinnings that would make me more slight as a younger woman, less so for, not, I didn't wear padding as an old, but, things were a little bit broader. The hemline was a little bit longer and less flattering. But, he would adjust things as according to her age, as well as the period that we were living in, because we go into the 60s and 70s. So, yeah, it was amazing. And Mark just had more research than I think Bradley. I mean, it was nuts. He had photos that we'd never seen, and was in touch with the Bernstein children as well. So about halfway through the shoot, they brought a dress that was Felicia's dress that I wore in the film. And then when she was sick, I don't know if he had a conversation with them, but there's a cardigan that she wears over her shoulder, and he said that she had worn something very similar to that when she was unwell. And having that sort of over her oversized kind of flannel shirt just made her look so much more fragile and thin and unwell so just all of those details were just incredible.
I was reading about you and Bradley workshopping. Talk about that a little bit, because that's a fascinating thing that you guys did together.
Yeah, it was weird. So after I did Wildlife with Paul Dano, I said to him, like, I just feel like I need some sort of guidance, someone I can talk to about work, because I don't feel like I'm very good at going off on my own and prepping for things. And particularly now I've got 3 kids, I have to like find a window to be like, this is my designated preparation time. Otherwise I just sort of end up internet shopping, So I was like, and so he introduced me to Kim Gillingham, who is someone he's worked with. And we started working together just before Promising Young Woman. And, she does dream work. And that was something I didn't really know very much about. And we didn't do a huge amount of on the films that I worked with her on. We did Promising and She Said and The Dig together, but we sort of touched on it a bit, but never really, we were working largely on Zoom, so we never really did much of it, but a little bit. But then Bradley said that he had done a dream workshop for every film he's done forever, for a long time. And the person that was going to do it, he wanted us to do one for 5 days, and his person couldn't do it. So I said, well, Kim does that, so we can... so Kim came and we did this 5 days of, just the 3 of us in his loft in New York. And we would come in and, you record your dreams, and then you talk about them, and, then you kind of work on them. And it's all very, sort of vulnerable and intimate, lots of crying. And in that you sort of, I guess, you connect your subconscious to your character so that you don't have to act. I mean, I think that's the basic idea, as I understood it. And it was amazing and like really scary. But also then when you've done really scary things with someone, it makes everything else easier. Going for, with another actor, then you're like, oh, well, this is now fine because we've done this mad thing. And things came out of it, like sitting back to back. We found that in the dream workshop, that we would just sit back to back, and it felt like it felt very much like them as a couple, and also such a metaphor for their relationship. And so little things came out of it that kind of then Josh and Bradley put into the script.
You kind of touched on it earlier, working with Bradley, he would be on set at 2:00 in the morning, getting into makeup. What is that like, working with somebody who is the director, the writer, and also your acting partner? Like, and I mean, Bradley Cooper specifically.
It was really great. I mean, I don't know if I had any, I don't think I expected anything really. I just thought, I knew he was going to be in the dialect all day, because it was impossible to come in and out of it, because it was so specific. And it wasn't like we had to call him Lenny or anything. I mean, it wasn't like, it wasn't sort of, we had to treat him like it was the 1940s. Like he was very much, directing the crew and all that kind of stuff. But it just meant that he would be able to do, like I said, direct me through his performance, or, if you can't see his mouth, then maybe he's talking to the crew. So there's the bit where she receives the diagnosis was meant to just stay in a wide, but then as we were doing it, he realized that he wanted the camera to push in. So when he's behind me or we're hugging, he's talking to the dolly grip. He's saying like, Mango, come in. And Mango's like pushing in. So there were bits where he would be direct. If he was off camera or you couldn't see his face, he would be directing, because lots of the shots are one-ers, so he didn't want to cut. And it was weird because ordinarily I'm very kind of self-conscious about being filmed, or the crew, I always get like a bit stuck in my head sometimes. But actually, it made it feel like they were part of a company. That there wasn't like a sort of divide between the cast and the crew. Like they were kind of they may as well have been in period costumes. Do you know what I mean? It didn't feel like they were something else. It felt like we were all, so it was cool. And I remember like actors like Gideon Glick came in. He was like, "What's it like?" So it was his first day. I said, like, you just never know. You just sort of start talking and, he'll film it. Like there's no like action, it was just like you would walk onto set and suddenly he'd be like Lenny chatting to you, and you would realize that he was maybe saying words from the script, and then you'd start talking back, and then you're like, oh, there's someone filming. And, but it was very like, he tried to take away all the artifice of the filmmaking thing, which if you like theatre, which I do, it's like, great. You feel like you're on a stage.
I want to jump on something you just said about being in your head. This is a room full of actors. How do you stop yourself from getting in your head when you're like, in the middle of a scene or about to shoot a scene? Like, what is that advice?
Oh man, I find it a lot easier with theatre just to like get out of it. But I think with film, what I learned, actually, Paul Dano was amazing on Wildlife, because there was a scene in that where I was really stuck in and I kept on cutting myself, like as in I would be doing the scene and I go, oh, I cut, sorry. And then they'd all go, oh, fuck's sake. And then, they'd and Paul was like, just trust me. If it feels horrible, it's probably she feels horrible. You're meant to just, and so I just did a take and I didn't cut. And it was the take he ended up using in the film. But I think that's often true, that if you are dying inside, maybe just that's you're meant to be or something, So I learned rule number one is to no one should say cut apart from the director. Which was good. And then, just I think it's really a trust thing with the director. I felt with Bradley, like I always, we always had a nod at the end. We would know that it was good, but he was very kind of, the scene that took the longest was the Palm Court scene. We just did that over and over and over again. Because I got stuck in my head, and he was like, that you should be stuck in your head. And so like, be more stuck in your head. But I think it's just, there's always going to be those days. And I often find it's the days where, like on Promising Young Woman, the day was the last scene before she gets murdered, was when she's talking to him. It was this bit about Nina, her friend. And I said to Emerald, like over and over again, I was like, I fucked it, can't do it. And it's because it was the bit that when I read the script, I was like, that's an amazing piece of writing. And I'd built it up so much in my head. So I think, there's always going to be those things. And, if you're good in like 70% of a film, I think it's fine.
I would say that you're good in 100% of this film. Last question. What did you learn about yourself making Maestro and working on it?
Well, when I was talking to Kim originally about this, my husband was making a solo album. And I was playing it to her, and it was the first time he'd done anything on his own, and it was really remarkable and really vulnerable and really honest and brave. And we were talking about what an artist he was, and she said, it's interesting because you think of Marcus as an artist, but you don't think of yourself as an artist. You think of yourself as a farmer, because we live in the countryside. And I was like, well, I am a farmer, but I think it was, And I said, we're going to do this stuff, and Bradley wants to do the Dream Workshop, and the dialect and all, and I was like, it's all just a bit. I feel like, I don't know how I'm going to do that, not method thing, but like almost method thing. Like that feels. I'm English, and she was like, what would happen if you actually tried? And she wrote it down on a piece of paper, and she was like, this is what I'm challenging you for this film, is like, what would happen if you actually just stopped being scared of all of those actor things that you think you can't do because you're too scared to do them, and just do it and not, and so I think part of, and that was all Bradley like leading the way with all of that stuff. But I do think that it made me feel like, I've always felt it's good to try really hard and not be someone who's trying to play anything cool. But I feel like with this one, there was no other way to do it apart from really try. But it did change the way I think about work and the kind of, that you want to make things that last, that live. And I feel like that happens when you make something really honest that touches people. And I feel like we did try really hard to tell the truth, and make something that lives on. So I think it changed how I kind of view my job, particularly as a mum. Like, I love my job so much that when I leave my kids, I think I'm doing something purely selfish, and that, but actually it's my job and I should be able to give it the time that it deserves to make good things. So yeah, it was lots of things, but definitely something that changed how I'm going to work going forward, I think.
I love that. That was phenomenal. Thank you, Carey, for sharing that insight into your process. Thank you to SAG-AFTRA Foundation.